to Echo 361 Study Session 3 Commercial Banking Introduction. In this study session, we will examine the historical development of commercial banking activities in general and later narrowed it down to Nigeria. The roles of commercial banks will also be enumerated. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the historical development of commercial banking. 2. Enumerate the roles of commercial banks in any economy. Overview of commercial banking. A commercial bank is a financial institution whose primary activity is to act as a payment agent for customers and to borrow and lend money. It is an institution for receiving, keeping and lending money. The word bank was derived from an Italian word, banco, that is desk or bench, that was used during the Renaissance by Florentine bankers who used to make their transactions above a desk covered by a green tablecloth. However, there have been traces of banking activities even in ancient times. In fact, the word traces its origin back to the ancient Roman Empire, where money lenders who set up their stores in the middle of enclosed courtyards called macella, or a long bench called banco, from where the words banco and bank were derived. As a money changer, the merchant at the banco did not so much invest money as merely convert the foreign currency into the only legal tender in Rome. In England, commercial banking started with the goldsmith, who developed the practice of storing people's gold and valuables for safekeeping. At the initial stage, such establishments were simply like the baggage warehouse, where depositors left gold for safekeeping and were given a receipt. At a later date, they will present their receipt, pay a small fee for the safekeeping, and get back their gold. These goldsmiths found it more convenient to return exactly the same piece of gold that each customer had left. However, the customers were willing to accept any gold as long as it was equivalent in value to what they had deposited. This anonymity was important, for it freed goldsmith to relend the gold. The goldsmith, that is, bankers, recognize the fact that deposits are payable on demand. They are not all withdrawn together. Reserves equal to total deposit will be necessary if all depositors suddenly had to be paid off in full at the same time, but this almost never occurred. On a given day, some people make withdrawals while others make deposits. These two kinds of transactions generally balanced out. The bankers did not much like keeping 100% of deposit as a sterile reserve sitting in a vault. Reserves do not earn interest. Early banks eat upon the idea of using the money entrusted to them to make money or buy bonds and other earning assets. They later found that investing their deposit was beneficial because depositors could still be paid on demand, while the bank could make some extra earnings. By putting most of the money deposited with the bank in an earning asset and keeping only fractional cash reserve against deposits, banks maximize their profit. With this profit, they can provide extra services. The transformation of these banks into fractional reserve banks, that is, they are holding fractional rather than 100% reserved against deposit, was revolutionary. Thus, these enable banks to create money. Development of commercial banking in Nigeria. Ajayi divided into two periods the historical development of commercial banking in Nigeria. First, the pre-independent period, 1872 to 1959, which was characterized by uncertainty in Nigeria's financial development. Banking activities were not adequately regulated during this period. African Banking Corporation was the first commercial bank in the country, which was established in 1872 with the aim of distributing the Bank of England notes for the British Treasury. In 1894, the Bank of British West Africa was established, now known as First Bank of Nigeria, which was followed by the establishment of Barclays Bank in 1917. The first main reason for setting up these banks was to provide banking services for the British commercial interest and colonial administration in West Africa. The Bank of British West Africa became an agent of the West African Currency Board when the board was established in 1912. The bank had until then been the principal importer of currency from the British Treasury. Prior to 1933, when the National Bank of Nigeria was established as the first indigenous bank to survive, the banking industry in Nigeria was dominated by foreign banks. The Industrial and Commercial Bank, as well as Nigerian Mercantile Bank, were the indigenous banks that were established before 1933 but did not survive or failed due to inadequate capital, fraudulent practices, and bad management. There were increases in the level of economic activities and high export prices after World War II, which led to the development of 4 indigenous banks between May 1945 and January 1947. Only 2 of these banks were able to survive, and they were African Continental Bank and the Agbomabe Bank, now known as Wema Bank. During the period 1950 to 1951, about 18 banks sprung up without justification. This is the reason why the period is known as banking boom in the history of banking in Nigeria. However, by the end of 1954, virtually all of these banks had gone into either voluntary liquidation or being shut down by the police. The Merchant Bank, which was the only survivor, also collapsed in the early parts of 1960. Ajayi was of the view that the development of indigenous banks in Nigeria was indeed a very turbulent one, with the result of eroding the confidence that people had in them. The reason that were attributable for the collapse of these banks are that they have inadequate capital, too many branches, poor management, lack of foresight, inadequate bookkeeping, and at times there were no banking regulations to specify the code of conduct. Roles of commercial banks. Commercial banks engage in the following activities. 1. Processing of payment by way of telegraphic transfer, internet banking, or other means. 2. Issuing bank draft and bank checks. 3. Accepting money on term deposit. 4. Lending money by way of overdraft, installment loan or otherwise. 5. Providing documentary and standby letter of credit, guarantees, performance bond, securities, underwriting, commitment, and other forms of off-balance sheet exposures. 5. Safekeeping of documents and other items in safe deposit. And 7. Currency exchange. The commercial banks also perform some economic functions such as 1. Issuance of money in the forms of banknotes and currency account subject to check or payment at the customer's order. These claims on banks can act as many because they are negotiable and or repayable on demand, and hence valued at par and effectively transferable by mere delivery in the case of banknotes, or by drawing a check, delivery to the payee, to bank or cash. 2. Settlement of payments. Here the bank acts as both collection agent and paying agent for customers, and participate in interbanking clearing and settlement systems to collect, present, be presented with, and pay payment instrument. This enables banks to economize on reserves held for settlement of debt, since inward and outward payment offset each other. It also enables payment flows between geographical areas to offset, reducing the cost of settling payment between geographical areas. 3. Credit intermediation. Banks lend money back to banks on their own account as middlemen. 4. Credit quality improvement. Banks lend money to ordinary commercial and personal borrowers, but are high quality borrowers. The improvement comes from the diversification of the bank's assets and the bank's own capital, which provides a buffer to absorb losses without defaulting on its own obligations. However, since banknotes and deposits are generally unsecured, if the bank gets into difficulty and pledges asset or security to try to get the funding it needs to continue to operate, this puts the note holders and depositors in an economically subordinate position. 5. Maturity transformation. Banks borrow more on demand debt and short-term debt, but provide more long-term loans. In other words, banks borrow short and lend long. Banks can do this because they can agree issues, e.g. accepting deposit and issuing banknotes, and redemption, e.g. withdrawals and issuing banknotes, maintain reserve of cash, invest in the marketable securities that can be readily converted to cash if needed, and raise replacement funding as needed from various sources, because they have a high and more well-known credit quality than most other borrowers. Money creation functions of the commercial banks. It is well-known fact that commercial banks create money in the economy. The mechanism of money creation of the commercial bank can be illustrated with a vivid example. To illustrate the process with which a cash deposit of 1 million naira can be made to support 10 million naira in bank deposit, we make the following assumptions as given by Ajayi 2006. 1. Many banks operate within the economy. 2. 10% is required as the legal reserve ratio. this is held against deposit liabilities. 3. Loans are made by all the banks that is up to the limit set by the reserve requirement before the receipt of the additional cash. 4. It is also assumed that all funds loaned by and checks drawn on one bank are deposited in the same or another bank. 5. A bank in the banking system must receive the initial deposit of 1 million naira cash. 6. There is cash withdrawal in the banking system. That is, the public must be willing to borrow as much as the bank is able and willing to lend. The mechanism for money creation is described as follows. The bank of initial deposit received 1 million naira, places 100,000 in reserves and lends 900,000. This is lent to a customer of the bank who later issues a check to a creditor for 900,000. The check is later deposited in a bank. The bank that receives the check proceeds to keep 90,000 and lends out 810,000. Someone gains the possession of this money after being spent by the borrowers and deposit it in another bank. The receiving bank keeps 81,000 and lends out 729,000. The amount is then deposited in another bank after being spent by the borrower, in which 10% is kept as a cash reserve and the reserve is lent out. When the initial 1 million naira has diffused itself throughout the system, total deposit will amount to 10 million naira, 10 times the original deposit, while the loans will be 9 million as reflected in table 3.1. According to Ajayi 2006, the deposit column is the additional of geometric series which could be expressed as 1 million plus 1 million times 0.9 plus 1 million times 0.9 to power 2 plus 1 million times 0.9 to power 3 plus 1 million times 0.9 to power n. Putting these in algebraic form, a plus ar to power 1 plus ar to power 2 plus ar to power 3 to ar to power n. As n tends to infinity, the value of total deposit is a times 1 over 1 minus r, where r is greater than 0 but less than 1. Given that 1 million naira is the initial deposit and r equals 0.9, then equation 3 becomes 1 million times 1 over 1 minus 0.9, which gives us 10 million naira. It could be seen from this illustration that the banking system was able to expand deposit 10 times the initial amount deposited through the continuous use of fund. The mechanism of money creation will come to close when no bank has any excess reserve to lend. Summary. In this study session, you have learned that a commercial bank is a financial institution for receiving, keeping and lending money. In England, commercial banking started with the goldsmith who developed the practice of storing gold and valuables for safekeeping. Commercial banks engage in the following activities. 1. Processing of payment by way of telegraphic transfer, internet banking or other means. 2. Issuing bank draft and bank checks. 3. Accepting money on term deposit. 4. Lending money by way of overdraft, installment loan, or otherwise. 5. Providing documentary and standby letter of credit, guarantees, performance bonds, security underwriting, commitment, and other forms of off-balance sheet exposures. 6. Safeguarding of documents and other items in safe deposit. And 7. Currency exchange. This is the end of study session 3.